Everyone mocked their simple wedding, but they regretted it when Avery Sterling felt her heart tighten as the first laughs echoed among the guests. She was perched on the buckskin horse, holding tight to her husband's waist, when she realized that everything she had planned with such care was being ridiculed. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. It wasn't supposed to hurt this much. From the moment they arrived at the country estate, riding that horse that belonged to Ethan's uncle, her husband, Avery already knew she would face judgment, but nothing prepared her for the cruelty in the eyes of her own family. Ethan squeezed her hand, a silent gesture of support, and they headed toward the makeshift altar under the trees. "Look at that, it's like a cheap Western movie," Avery heard someone comment in a low voice, but loud enough for her to catch. "At least they could have rented a decent car," replied another female voice, followed by muffled giggles. Ethan dismounted first, 27 years old, wearing that red suit he had sewn himself with his mother's help. It wasn't perfect. The seams were a bit crooked in places, but he was proud of that suit. It was his, made with his own hands, every stitch carrying meaning. He reached out to help Avery down, and she accepted, holding the simple wedding dress that had belonged to her grandmother. The dress was decades old, but Avery had washed and fixed it carefully. It was made of a light fabric, slightly yellowed with age, with delicate lace that told stories from another era. For her, wearing that dress was honoring the memory of Grandmother Dorothy, the only person in the family who always believed that love was more important than anything else. "Is this really a wedding or a play?" whispered Brooke, Avery's cousin, while slyly pointing her phone at the couple. Avery saw the gesture and felt her legs weaken. She knew exactly what Brooke was doing. In a few minutes, those images would be spread across social media, accompanied by cruel captions. She knew her cousin well enough to know that would happen. Avery's father, Richard Sterling, sat in the first row of borrowed chairs, his face tense. He had never approved of this wedding from the start. To him, Ethan was just a poor boy without prospects, someone who would drag his daughter into a life of hardship. Beside him, Avery's mother, Margaret Sterling, discreetly wiped a tear, but it wasn't from emotion. It was from shame. Margaret had built a reputation in town over 30 years. She was known as the businesswoman who turned a small clothing store into a respected chain. Important clients trusted her. Suppliers sought her out. She had status, respect, influence. And now she saw it all crumbling because her daughter had chosen to get married like this. Ethan led Avery to the altar, where the officiant, a simple elderly man named Harold, who was a friend of his family, waited with a warm smile. But among the guests, the tension only grew. Most of the people present were from Avery's family, members of the local high society, who had come more out of obligation than genuine interest. "Are you ready?" asked Mr. Harold in that deep, gentle voice. "We are," replied Ethan, and Avery nodded, trying to ignore the looks of contempt around her. On the right side were Ethan's few relatives. His mother, Mrs. Janet, a 52-year-old seamstress with calloused hands from years of work, was crying with emotion. Beside her, his father, Mr. Frank, a 60-year-old mechanic, maintained an upright posture despite the obvious discomfort of being surrounded by people who judged him. "Before we begin, I would like to—" Mr. Harold was interrupted by a sudden movement. Aunt Victoria, Beatrice's older sister, and one of the richest women in town, rose dramatically from her chair. She was 63 years old, wearing a very expensive dress and jewelry that sparkled under the afternoon sun. With firm steps, she walked until she stood right in front of the couple. "I can't stay silent," Victoria announced in that authoritative voice she used to command business meetings. "Beatrice, Richard, this is absurd. Your daughter deserves better than this." The silence that fell was so heavy that Avery found it hard to breathe. Ethan squeezed her hand tighter. "I came prepared," Victoria continued, opening her designer bag and pulling out an envelope. "Here's enough money for you to have a real wedding. A decent wedding, worthy of our family's name." Ethan stepped forward, positioning himself between Victoria and Avery. "You can keep that," he said, with a firm but respectful voice. "We don't need your money. How dare you answer me like that?" Victoria raised her voice, her face turning red. "You're nothing but a... Be careful with what you're about to say," Ethan warned, staying calm despite the anger beginning to boil inside him. Avery pulled Ethan's arm, trying to calm him down. She looked at her aunt, and for a moment her eyes filled with tears. "Aunt Victoria, please," Avery pleaded, her voice trembling. "This is our day. We planned everything with love. It may not be what you expected, but it's what we wanted." "Wanted?" Victoria let out a bitter laugh. "You've been tricked by this boy, Avery. He convinced you to do this ridiculous thing because he can't afford anything better." "I haven't been tricked," Avery replied, finding strength in her own voice. "I chose this. I chose him." "Then you chose wrong," Victoria shot back, throwing the envelope on the floor before returning to her seat. "When you regret it, don't come crying to the family." "Mr." Harold cleared his throat, trying to resume the ceremony, but the mood was already completely destroyed. Avery felt all those dozens of eyes on her, judging every detail. The old dress, the poorly stitched red suit, the horse still nearby, grazing peacefully, oblivious to all the human drama. Behind them, Samantha, who had been Avery's godmother as a child and was now one of the bridesmaids, discreetly stood up and began walking toward the exit. Avery saw her out of the corner of her eye. "Samantha?" she called, but the young woman didn't turn around. "I'm sorry, Avery," Samantha murmured over her shoulder. "I can't be part of this. People will judge me for being here." And so, in the middle of the ceremony that hadn't even really started yet, one of the bridesmaids simply left. Other guests exchanged glances, clearly considering doing the same. Avery felt the world spin. She had lost a 15-year friend in a matter of seconds. Ethan held Avery's face with both hands, forcing her to look at him. "Look at me," he asked, with those brown eyes full of determination. "It doesn't matter what they think. It doesn't matter who leaves. What matters is us." "But everyone is—" Avery started, but her voice faltered. "Everyone can leave if they want," Ethan stated, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I came here to marry the woman I love, and that's what I'm going to do." Mrs. Janet began to cry louder, proud of her son. Mr. Frank nodded in approval. But on the other side, Beatrice hid her face in her hands, unable to watch. Richard then stood up, and Avery felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe her father would defend her choice, support her in that difficult moment. But what he did was worse than any words. He simply left. Without saying anything, without looking back, Richard Sterling walked out of his own daughter's wedding. Margaret Sterling stood frozen for a few seconds, torn between following her husband or staying. In the end, she also got up, muttering empty excuses, and went after him. Avery felt something break inside her. Her own parents had just abandoned her on her wedding day. Tears streamed down her face, smearing the little makeup she had carefully applied that morning. "Do you want to continue?" Mr. Harold asked gently. "It's fine if you want to postpone." Ethan looked at Avery, waiting for her to decide. And there, in that moment of deep pain, Avery had to make a choice. She could give up. She could run after her parents. She could cancel everything and go back to the life she had before. Or she could move forward, even if it meant losing everything and everyone she knew. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to hit like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us beginners. Now, continuing, Avery wiped her tears with the back of her hand and took a deep breath. She looked at Ethan, at that man who had been rejected, humiliated, and disrespected, but who was still there, steady, holding her hand. "I want to continue," she said, and her voice came out stronger than she expected. "Let's get married." The ceremony went on, but with far fewer people. Several guests had taken advantage of the commotion to leave, citing urgent commitments. The photographer Margaret had hired, a woman named Victoria, known for her sophisticated work, approached Avery with a sour expression. "Look," Victoria began in a professional but cold tone. "I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not photographing the couple on the horse. That's not part of my portfolio. I work with high-end weddings, you know. This isn't the kind of image I want associated with my name." "But my mother already paid—" Avery tried to argue. "I'll refund the money," Victoria interrupted. "Sorry, but it's a professional matter." And just like that, another person turned their back on them. Mr. Harold, realizing the situation was getting worse and worse, decided to speed up the ceremony. He skipped several traditional parts and went straight to the essentials. "Ethan, do you take Avery as your wife?" "I do," Ethan replied without hesitation, looking into her eyes with an intensity that made Avery's heart tighten. "Avery, do you take Ethan as your husband?" "I do," she said, and in that moment she felt she was making the most important decision of her entire life. "Then by the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Mr. Harold announced. "You may kiss the bride." The kiss was sweet, but filled with sadness. Around them, a few timid applause echoed. Ethan's mother was crying heavily. His father was smiling, proud, but the absence of Avery's parents screamed louder than any applause. When the ceremony ended, fewer than 40 people remained. The reception that had been planned for over 200 guests felt far too empty. The tables decorated with wildflowers that Avery had picked herself looked sad under that heavy atmosphere. Austin, Avery's younger brother, had stayed. He was 22 and had always had a complicated relationship with his sister, but at that moment, he approached her. "Avery," he called out, looking uncomfortable. I have to go too." "Austin, why?" Avery asked, already tired of losing people. "I need to be with Mom and Dad," he explained, avoiding her gaze. "They're really shaken up, and I work at Sterling Boutiques, you know. I can't afford to upset them. So you're choosing money over your sister." Avery's voice came out harsher than she intended. "It's not about money," Austin defended himself. It's complicated. You made this decision knowing the consequences. Now you have to deal with them." And he also left, leaving Avery feeling more and more alone. Ethan hugged her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "We still have each other," he murmured. "And we have these people who stayed. They're the ones who really matter." Avery looked around. There were Mrs. Janet, Mr. Frank, some of Ethan's friends she barely knew, neighbors from the country estate where the ceremony took place, Mr. Harold and his wife. They were simple people, but they were people who chose to stay. During the party, which took place even with so few people, Avery tried to have fun. She danced with Ethan, ate some of the simple cake his mother had made, toasted with the guests, but the pain wouldn't go away. Every moment, she found herself looking at the entrance, hoping her parents would come back, apologize, say they had overreacted. But they didn't come back. When night fell and the party ended, Avery and Ethan went to the small house they had rented. It was a modest place on the outskirts of town, with 2 tiny bedrooms, a cramped living room, and a kitchen that could barely fit 2 people at once. But it was theirs. Avery sat on the edge of the bed, still in her wedding dress, and finally let the pent-up tears out. She sobbed loudly, letting all the pain and humiliation of the day pour out. Ethan knelt in front of her, holding her hands between his. "I'm so sorry," he said, and Avery saw that he too had tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry you lost your family because of me." "It wasn't because of you," Avery replied between sobs. "It was their choice. They chose pride over me. Even so, if you want to go back, if you want to undo all this—" "No," Avery interrupted him, wiping away her tears. "I won't go back. I made my choice. I chose you, Ethan. I chose our life together, even if it's hard." They stayed there, holding each other, crying together until exhaustion overcame the pain. When they finally fell asleep, it was almost dawn. In the days that followed, Avery discovered that the wedding had become the most talked-about subject in town. Brooke, the cousin, had done exactly what Avery imagined. She had posted several photos and videos on social media, with sarcastic captions like, "When you want to save money on your wedding," and "New style, cowboy bride." The posts had thousands of likes and hundreds of cruel comments. Avery saw it all. Every word hurt like a knife. People she didn't even know were laughing at her, judging her choices, making jokes about her life. Some comments were particularly cruel, mocking Ethan's red suit, calling him a circus clown and saying that Avery had lost her mind. She deactivated her social media accounts, but the damage was already done. The whole town knew. When she went out to buy groceries at the local deli, she felt the stares, heard the whispers. The saleswomen who had once been kind now treated her with a mix of pity and morbid curiosity. Ethan also faced his own battles. Mr. Frank, his father, had worked at the same auto repair shop for nearly 25 years. It was a respected place where people from all social classes brought their cars. But after the wedding, everything changed. One day, a client from high society came to the shop and recognized Mr. Frank. She had been at the wedding as a distant guest of Avery's family. "Oh, you're the father of that boy," she said with a fake smile. "What a different wedding." Mr. Frank didn't respond, just kept working on her car. But the woman didn't stop. "My husband and I said we had never seen anything so embarrassing," she continued. "Poor Margaret must be dying of shame. Imagine working your whole life to build a respectable name, and then your daughter gets married like that." "You can take your car and find another repair shop," Mr. Frank said, finally setting down his tools. "Excuse me?" The woman's eyes widened, offended. "I said you can leave," he repeated more firmly. "We don't need customers who disrespect my family." The woman left indignantly, promising to tell everyone about that horrible service. And she kept her promise. In the following days, several high society clients cancelled scheduled services. The owner of the repair shop, a man named Mike, who had always treated Mr. Frank well, called him in for a talk. "Frank, you're one of my best mechanics," Mike began, looking uncomfortable. "But this situation with your son's wedding is affecting the business." "Ethan's wedding has nothing to do with my work," Mr. Frank argued. I know," Mike sighed. "But the clients are complaining. They say they don't want to be associated with your family. It's a delicate situation." "Are you firing me?" Mr. Frank asked, feeling a tightness in his chest. No, Mike hurried to say, "but maybe it's better if you take some time off. Let things cool down." Mr. Frank went home devastated. Mrs. Janet, who was sewing a dress for a client, saw her husband's face and knew something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked. "Mike told me to take time off," he said, dropping into the kitchen chair, "because of Ethan's wedding. The rich clients are complaining." "So they're punishing you because of a party?" Mrs. Janet dropped the fabric, indignant. "That's how it works, Janet," Mr. Frank said bitterly. "We've always known there's this class difference, but now we're feeling just how much it hurts." That night, Ethan went to visit his parents and found them crestfallen. When Mr. Frank told him what had happened, Ethan felt an overwhelming guilt. "Dad, this is my fault," he said, his voice choked. "I didn't think it would affect you." "It's not your fault," Mr. Frank replied, putting his hand on his son's shoulder. "You married the woman you love, that's not a crime. The guilty ones are those petty people who can't accept that not everyone lives the same way." "But you lost your job because of me." "I didn't lose it," Mr. Frank corrected. "It's just a forced vacation. It'll pass. People forget." But Ethan knew it wasn't that simple. People wouldn't forget easily. It had become a mark, a stigma that would haunt the whole family. Meanwhile, at the Sterling's house, the situation wasn't any better. Margaret had been locked in her room since the wedding day, refusing to come out. Richard tried to work normally, but it was impossible to ignore the looks and comments. At the family business, Sterling Boutiques, which had 3 stores across the city, employees whispered. Customers discreetly asked about Avery's wedding. Some, the bolder ones, made direct comments. "Margaret, I saw the photos on social media," said a long-time client, pretending to be concerned. "How are you handling it?" "I'd rather not comment," Margaret replied, forcing a professional smile. "But it must have been so hard for you," the client insisted. "Everyone's talking about it. They say your daughter has completely lost her mind." Margaret endured for days, but reached a point where she couldn't take it anymore. She started avoiding the main store, delegating responsibilities to her sister Victoria, and spending more and more time at home, isolated. Richard, for his part, had his own problems. He was a partner in an accounting firm and had several important clients. One of them, a businessman who had been invited to the wedding, sought him out in his office. "Richard, my friend," began the man, Carlton, a 60-year-old with a stern face. "I need to talk to you about something delicate." "Go ahead," Richard replied, already guessing what it would be. "Look, "I've always respected you as a professional," Carlton continued, "but that wedding of your daughter's, it was a disrespect to all the guests. My wife spent weeks talking about it, and now people are asking me why I do business with you." "Carlton, my daughter's wedding has nothing to do with my work," Richard tried to defend himself. "But it has to do with your reputation," Carlton countered. "And reputation is everything in our circles, you know that. I can't keep working with someone who can't even control their own family." "Are you breaking the contract?" Richard asked, feeling the ground disappear beneath his feet. "I'm saying that maybe it's better for us to take a break," Carlton said, standing up and adjusting his suit. "When things calm down, we'll talk again." But Richard knew that take a break meant the contract was over, and Carlton wasn't the only one. In the following days, 2 other important clients did the same thing. The excuse was always similar: issues of image, reputation, association. Austin, Avery's brother, heard all this and felt more and more resentful. He worked in the finance department of their mother's company, Sterling Boutiques, and saw how the revenue was being affected. Sales dropped. Important suppliers began to question the partnership, all because of a wedding. One night, during a tense dinner at the Sterling home, Austin exploded. "This is Avery's fault," he said, banging his fork on the table. "She knew that ridiculous wedding was going to affect everyone, but she didn't care." "Austin, don't talk about your sister like that," Margaret asked, her voice weak. "Why not? It's the truth," Austin continued. "She only thought of herself. She didn't think about you, about Dad, about me, about the company, about anything. She just did whatever she wanted." "She made a choice," Richard said, but his voice lacked conviction. "A selfish choice," Austin insisted, "and now we're all paying for it." The silence that followed was heavy. Deep down, Margaret and Richard agreed with Austin. They also felt betrayed by Avery. How could she do that to them? How could she completely ignore everything they had built over the years? Avery, of course, knew nothing about all this. She and Ethan were living in their small house, trying to start a life together. Their savings were already running out, and they desperately needed to find ways to earn money. Ethan had worked as an assistant in a small woodworking shop before the wedding, but after the scandal, the owner let him go. The official excuse was cost-cutting, but Ethan knew the truth. No one wanted to be associated with him or his family. Avery had a business administration degree, but her experience was limited. She had worked for 2 years at her mother's company, but clearly she couldn't count on that job now. She started sending resumes to various companies in the area. The first interview was at a clothing store, a medium-sized establishment, looking for an assistant manager. Avery dressed carefully, wearing one of the few nice outfits she had brought from home. She was nervous but confident. Her experience at her mother's company, even if brief, was relevant. The interviewer was a woman in her 40s named Brenda. She greeted Avery with a professional smile and began asking standard questions. Everything was going well until Brenda asked, "Are you related to Margaret Sterling?" Avery hesitated, but decided to be honest. "Yes, I'm her daughter." "Oh." Patricia nodded, and Avery saw something shift in her face. "You're the bride from the horse wedding, aren't you?" Avery's heart sank. "Yes, that's me." "I see." Patricia closed the folder with Avery's resume. "Well, Avery, it was a pleasure meeting you. We'll review your profile and get in touch." Avery knew that "get in touch" was just a polite way of saying no. And she was right. Days later, she received a generic email saying they had selected another candidate. The same thing happened at the next 3 interviews. As soon as the interviewers found out who she was, the interview took a different turn. The questions got shorter, the interest waned, and the result was always the same: rejection. Ethan faced a similar situation. He had carpentry skills and was willing to work at anything, but doors kept closing one after another. In a small town, news travels fast. Everyone knew who he was, and no one wanted to be associated with that guy from the ridiculous wedding. One day, returning from another failed interview, Avery found Ethan sitting on the small couch in the living room, his head in his hands. "Another no?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "The guy didn't even let me in," Ethan said, his voice heavy with frustration. "He said there were no more openings, but I saw their ad in the paper this morning. They're hiring. They just don't want to hire me." Avery sat down beside him and rested her head on his shoulder. "We'll make it," she said, trying to convince herself as much as him. "We have to." "And if we don't?" Ethan asked, turning to look at her. "Avery, our savings will run out in 2 months. 2 months. After that, we won't even have money for rent." "Then we'll find something before that," Avery replied, but the fear was evident in her voice. "You could go back to your parents' house," Ethan suggested, and Avery saw the pain in his eyes as he said it. "They'll take you back. You know they will." "I'm not abandoning you," Avery said firmly. "Not after everything we've been through." "But—" "No buts," she interrupted. "We promised to stand by each other in tough times, remember? This is the tough time, and we'll get through it together." But as the days passed, the situation became more and more desperate. They started cutting expenses. They stopped buying anything that wasn't absolutely essential. Meat became a luxury they only bought once a week. Avery learned to cook creatively, making miracles with rice, beans, and eggs. Mrs. Janet noticed the couple's struggles and started showing up with extra leftovers she claimed she had made by accident. Avery knew it was a lie, that her mother-in-law was making that food especially for them, but she accepted it gratefully. Pride had its place, but hunger left no room for it. Mr. Frank, who was still on forced vacation from the workshop, started picking up odd jobs in the neighborhood where they lived. He fixed bicycles, simple electronic devices, anything people needed. The money was little, but it helped the family survive. Ethan, seeing his father's efforts, felt even more guilt. One night he talked to Avery about a possibility that had been running through his mind for days. "What if we asked your family for help?" he suggested. "No way," Avery replied immediately. "But Avery, maybe they've regretted it," Ethan insisted. "It's been almost 2 months. Maybe they want to make amends." "You don't know my mother," Avery said bitterly. "She's incapable of admitting she's wrong. If I go back there asking for help, she'll hold it against me forever. So it's just your pride getting in the way." "It's not pride." Avery defended herself, but she stopped, thinking better. "Or maybe it is, but it's a pride I need to have. If I go back now, crawling back to them, everything we went through will have been for nothing." Ethan didn't fully agree, but he respected her decision. They needed to find another way. The solution came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Janet had a friend, Mrs. Peggy, who lived in the same neighborhood. She ran a small business selling homemade savory treats for parties and events. One day, while talking to Mrs. Janet, she mentioned that she needed help because orders had increased. "Janet, do you know anyone who'd want to work with me?" Mrs. Peggy asked. "I need someone to help make the treats and handle deliveries." Mrs. Janet immediately thought of Ethan and Avery. "My daughter-in-law makes some delicious savory treats," she said, "and my son can help with deliveries. They're in need of work." "Are they the ones from the wedding everyone talked about?" Mrs. Peggy asked, and Mrs. Janet braced herself for another refusal. "Yes, they are." "Oh, how nice," Mrs. Peggy smiled. "I thought that wedding was just adorable, you know, so authentic. Nothing like those fancy weddings that are more about showing off money than about love." Mrs. Janet was surprised. She was the first person outside the immediate family to say something positive about the wedding. "You really think so?" "I do," Mrs. Peggy confirmed. "Send them over to talk to me. If your daughter-in-law's treats are as good as you say, we'll go into business together." When Mrs. Janet told Ethan and Avery, they could barely believe it. Finally, an opportunity. They went to talk to Mrs. Peggy the next day, and the woman, a 70-year-old lady with the energy of someone much younger, greeted them with enthusiasm. "You two are even better looking in person than in the photos," she joked. "I love that red suit, young man. Showed personality." Ethan and Avery exchanged glances, still not used to compliments. "The deal is simple," Mrs. Peggy explained. "You help me make the treats during the week, and on weekends you handle deliveries. I'll pay a fixed amount each week plus a percentage of sales. If things work out, we might even expand the business." "We'll take it," Avery said without hesitation. "Don't you even want to know the amount?" Mrs. Peggy laughed. "It doesn't matter," Ethan replied. "You're giving us a chance when no one else did. That's worth more than any salary." "Oh, my dears," Mrs. Peggy said, taking both their hands. "I'm not doing you any favors. I really need the help, but I'm happy to help you too." And so Ethan and Avery began working for Mrs. Peggy. The work was grueling. They woke up at 4 in the morning to start making the treats. They spent hours on their feet, frying, baking, packaging. On weekends, Ethan borrowed Mr. Frank's old car and drove around town making deliveries. The money wasn't much, but it was enough to pay the bills and eat decently. Slowly, their financial situation began to stabilize, but the prejudice hadn't disappeared. During deliveries, Ethan often faced uncomfortable situations. On one occasion, he had to deliver a large order to a Sweet 16 party. When he arrived at the address, a big house in Beverly Hills, he was greeted by the homeowner, an elegant woman in her 50s. "Leave it in the kitchen," she said, barely glancing at him. He walked in carrying the boxes of treats. In the kitchen, there were other people helping with the party. One of them, a younger woman, looked at Ethan and commented to her friend beside her, "That guy looks familiar." "He's the groom from the horse wedding," the friend replied, and they both started laughing quietly. Ethan pretended not to hear and kept unloading the treats, but as he was leaving, he overheard one of the women say, "Imagine sinking so low that you have to deliver treats after getting married. What a sad life." Ethan clenched his fists, but kept walking. There was no point in fighting. He needed that job. Avery, in turn, was facing different challenges. Making savory treats all day was physically exhausting. Her hands were stained with turmeric and smelled of onions, and no matter how much she washed, the odor lingered. She, who once had soft, well-cared-for hands, now had calluses and cuts from so much work. One day, while in Mrs. Peggy's small kitchen making chicken croquettes, Avery overheard a conversation between neighbors passing by on the street. "Look, it's Margaret's daughter," one of them pointed discreetly. "The one who married that broke guy," the other asked. "That's her. Poor thing. Look where she ended up, making savory treats to sell. I always said Margaret spoiled that girl too much. She wasn't ready for the real world." Avery bit her lip to keep from crying. The words hurt more than she expected, because deep down, a part of her agreed. She wasn't ready for that life. She had grown up with privileges, with comfort, never having to worry about money or hard work. Now she was living a completely different reality, and it was hard, much harder than she had imagined. At night, lying next to Ethan in their small room, Avery let silent tears fall. She didn't want him to see, didn't want him to know how much she was suffering, but Ethan knew. He always knew. "You can go back," he murmured in the dark. "I won't blame you." "I don't want to go back," Avery replied, even though sometimes the temptation was strong. "But you're suffering." "I am, but I'm suffering with you. And that's better than being comfortable without you." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. 3 months after the wedding, something unexpected happened. One morning, while Ethan was making deliveries, he stopped at a traffic light and saw a familiar car pull up next to him. It was Margaret's car. Mother and son-in-law looked at each other through the windows, and for a second Ethan thought about looking away, but he didn't. He waved politely. Margaret was paralyzed. She saw her son-in-law driving that old car, clearly on his way to a delivery, and felt something tighten in her chest. Ethan looked tired, thinner than she remembered. The light turned green, and they each went their separate ways, but that encounter kept hammering away in Margaret's mind. That night, Richard came home and found his wife sitting on the porch staring into space. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I saw Ethan today," Margaret told him. "He was driving an old car making food deliveries." "So?" Richard sat down beside her. "Richard, they must be going through terrible hardship," Margaret said, her voice trembling. "Our daughter is working making savory treats. Can you imagine that? Avery, who never had to do hard labor in her life, is now—" "She chose this life," Richard interrupted, but his tone was less harsh than before. "But she's our daughter," Margaret insisted. "We can't just abandon her." "We didn't abandon her. She abandoned us. She chose that boy over her family." "She chose love," Margaret corrected. and there was a new understanding in her voice. She chose to follow her heart, even knowing she would lose everything. Isn't that worthy of respect? Richard didn't answer. He had been thinking about that too in the past few weeks. His business had recovered a bit, but there was a void in the family's life. Avery was missed. The house felt empty without her laughter, without her presence. Austin, her brother, was also changing. He had started questioning his own choices. He had sided with his parents, had chosen money and security, but now he wondered if he had made the right choice. Avery had lost everything, but she still had her love. Austin had everything material, but he felt empty. Meanwhile, in Ethan's family, Mrs. Janet continued to be the pillar of strength. She visited the couple regularly, always bringing something. A cake, some rice, clothes she had mended. Mr. Frank had finally gone back to work at the shop, but things were not the same anymore. He had lost the trust and respect of some colleagues. One day, Mrs. Janet suggested something that would change the course of Ethan and Avery's lives. "Why don't you open your own business?" she asked, while the three of them had coffee together. "With what money, Mum?" Ethan asked. "You already know how to make savory treats. You already have customers through Mrs. Peggy. Why don't you start small, selling from home? Later, if it works out, you can expand." Avery became thoughtful. The idea wasn't absurd. They had really learned a lot from Mrs. Peggy, and people liked the savory treats they made. But starting your own business required investment, even if small. "Your father and I can help with the initial money," Mrs. Janet offered, as if she were reading Avery's thoughts. "Mom, you don't have extra money," Ethan protested. "We have a little saved up," she insisted, "and there's no better use for that money than investing in our children." "But we don't have any equipment or anything," Avery pointed out. "We start with what we have. With the stove at home, with the pots I can lend, little by little you buy what you need." The idea began to seem possible. Ethan and Avery talked for days, weighing the pros and cons. Talking to Mrs. Peggy was also essential. They didn't want to leave her in the lurch, not after everything she had done for them. When they told Mrs. Peggy about the idea, she didn't get angry as they feared. "I was waiting for this," she said with a smile. "You have talent. It would be a waste to keep working for me forever. Open your own business, and when you're established, we can even form partnerships." With Mrs. Peggy's blessing and the support of Ethan's parents, the couple decided to take the risk. They used the savings they had managed to put together from working, plus the money Mrs. Janet and Mr. Frank offered, and set up a small party savory treats business running from home. In the beginning, it was extremely difficult. The customers were few, mainly friends of Mrs. Peggy that she herself recommended. Sales barely covered costs, and there were weeks when they took a loss. Avery stayed up late doing the books, trying to figure out how to balance the finances. Ethan, for his part, took on the responsibility of making all the deliveries and also promoting the business. He printed simple flyers at a cheap print shop and distributed them around the neighborhoods, but most people simply threw the flyers away without even looking. "We need a different strategy," Avery said one night after another day of weak sales. "Like what?" Ethan asked, exhausted. "I don't know," she admitted. "But what we're doing isn't working." The answer came from an unexpected place. One day an elderly woman knocked on their door. She was small, frail, and seemed ill. Avery answered. "Good morning, how can I help you? I'm Mrs. Mildred." The woman introduced herself with a weak voice. "I live right on the corner. Mrs. Peggy told me you make savory treats for parties." "We do," Avery confirmed. "Would you like to place an order?" "I would, but—" Mrs. Mildred hesitated. "I don't have much money. For my granddaughter is having a birthday tomorrow, and I wanted to give her something special. But I only have $20. Avery looked at the elderly woman, seeing the hope and embarrassment in her eyes. $20 wasn't enough to make even half the amount of savory treats needed for a party. Avery could simply say it wasn't possible, that the amount was insufficient. But she found herself thinking about her own situation, how she had been helped when she needed it. $20 is enough, Avery said, and saw Mrs. Mildred's eyes fill with tears. "Really? You're not lying, so I won't be sad." I'm not lying, Avery assured. How many guests will there be? About 15, more or less. They're small children. Then it's perfect. I'll make treats for 15 children with that $20. When Ethan got home and found out what Avery had done, he was worried. Avery, we're barely managing to pay the bills, he said. And you're going to work for free? It's not free, it's $20, she replied. But the cost of the ingredients will be more than that. I know, Avery sighed. But Ethan, did you see that woman's eyes? She was so hopeful. I couldn't say no. Ethan wasn't happy with the decision, but he didn't argue further. They worked late into the night making the savory treats for Mrs. Mildred's granddaughter's birthday party. The next day, Ethan made the delivery himself. Mrs. Mildred could barely speak from emotion when she received the boxes full of treats. "My dear children, this is so much more than I expected," she said, tears streaming freely. "You don't know what this means to me." "We just want your granddaughter to have a beautiful party," Avery said. "She will," Mrs. Mildred assured, "and I'm going to tell everyone about you. Everyone will know you are good people." Ethan and Avery didn't pay much attention to those words. They went home, calculated the loss from that order, and continued with their lives. But Mrs. Mildred kept her promise. She told the neighbors. She told her friends from church. She told everyone she knew about the couple who had made delicious savory treats for a ridiculously low price, and more than that, about the couple who had been kind to her when she needed it most. The stories began to spread through the community, and unlike the story of the wedding that had spread through the high society circles with mockery and cruelty, this story spread among simple people with admiration and gratitude. Within a week, Ethan and Avery started receiving more orders, small ones, most of them from people who didn't have much money, but they were honest orders, from hard-working folks who wanted to throw parties for their children, their grandchildren, their families. And each order was handled with the same care and dedication. "You're different from the others," a customer commented one day. "We can tell you truly care." Avery realized that woman was right. They really did care. Each savory treat they made carried not just the ingredients but also love and dedication. They knew what it was like to be rejected, to be looked down upon, and so they treated every customer as if they were the most important person in the world. Word of mouth continued, and the business began to really grow. They needed to buy more equipment, hire help. Mr. Frank built an extension on their small house, turning part of the backyard into a makeshift commercial kitchen. But with growth came new challenges. An important supplier in the city refused to sell to them when he found out who they were. "Look, I don't want any trouble," the supplier, a man named Randall, said. "Margaret Sterling has been my customer for years. If I start selling to you, she'll get angry." "But Margaret won't even know," Ethan argued. "She always knows," Randall replied. "And I can't risk losing an important client because of you two." They had to find another supplier, one that was farther away and charged more. It impacted their profit margin, but they had no choice. Margaret, in fact, already knew about Ethan and Avery's business. Brooke, the cousin who had mocked the wedding on social media, had told her. "Aunt, did you know Avery is selling savory treats?" Brooke asked during a family lunch. "I heard something about it," Margaret replied, trying to sound indifferent. "It's pathetic," Brooke went on. "The daughter of the most respected businesswoman in town turning into a savory treat seller. What a fall." Margaret didn't answer, but Brooke's words echoed in her mind for days. Her daughter was selling savory treats. Avery, who had studied business administration, who had had every opportunity, was now working with food to make a living. Part of Margaret felt ashamed, but another part, a part she tried to ignore, felt something different. Pride. Because Avery hadn't given up. She hadn't come crawling back home asking for forgiveness. She had rolled up her sleeves and built something on her own. One day, driven by a curiosity she couldn't control, Margaret decided to do something she never imagined she would. She picked up the phone and dialed the number Brooke had mentioned, the number for Avery's savory treat business. It was Ethan who answered. "Hello, Sterling's Savory Treats, how can I help?" Margaret almost hung up when she heard her son-in-law's voice, but she forced herself to continue. "I'd like to place an order," she said, disguising her voice. Of course. When would it be for? For Saturday. A party with 50 people. Perfect. Can you give me your address? Margaret gave a fake address in a distant neighborhood. She jotted down the total, thanked him, and hung up. Then, on Saturday morning, she did something even more surprising. She went to that fake address and waited. Ethan arrived at the agreed time, carrying boxes of savory treats. He rang the doorbell, waited, rang again. No one answered. He called the number the client had given, but no one answered. Then he saw, across the street, a familiar woman watching from inside a car. Margaret. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then Ethan started crossing the street and Margaret got out of the car. Mother and son-in-law stood face to face for the first time since the wedding. You placed the order, Ethan said, not a question. I did, Margaret admitted. Why? I wanted to see, she replied. I wanted to see how you two were working, if what people say was true. And what do people say? Ethan asked with a hint of bitterness. That you make the best savory treats in town? That you treat everyone with respect no matter how much money they have? That you are good people? Ethan didn't expect to hear that. He was silent, processing. Does Avery know you're here? Margaret asked. No, she's at home making more savory treats for another party this afternoon. How is she? Tired, working hard, but happy, Ethan replied, and there was truth in his words. Despite everything, she's happy. And you? Are you happy? I am, Ethan confirmed. Life is hard, I won't lie. We struggle every day, but we're building something of our own with our own hands. That has value. Margaret looked at the boxes of savory treats Ethan was holding. How much do I owe? Nothing, Ethan said. You can cancel the order. But you already made everything. We'll sell it another way. We always sell. Margaret wanted to insist, but something in Ethan's posture stopped her. He wasn't accepting anything from her. It was a silent way of maintaining his dignity. Ethan, Margaret called when he was turning to leave. Is Avery really okay? She's not regretful? Why don't you ask her that yourself? Ethan replied and got into the car. Margaret stood in the empty street, watching the old car drive away. And for the first time in months she wondered if she had been completely wrong, if she had lost her daughter out of pride and arrogance. That night, Ethan told Avery about the encounter. She was surprised, confused, and finally angry. She has no right to show up like this, Avery said, pacing back and forth in the small living room. To spy on me, to want to know how I'm doing. If she really wanted to know, she could have just called me all these past months. Maybe she's trying, Ethan suggested gently. Trying what? To get close? To apologize? Avery stopped and looked at him. Ethan, my mother abandoned me on my wedding day. She turned her back on me when I needed her most. I'm not going to forget that easily. I'm not saying forget, Ethan said. I'm just saying, maybe she's changing. People change. My mother doesn't change, Avery said with conviction. She is who she is, always has been. But in the following days, Avery found herself thinking about that encounter. Was her mother really trying to get close, or was it just morbid curiosity, wanting to see how low her daughter had fallen? Meanwhile, the business kept growing. They started receiving orders from more distant neighborhoods. A local school hired them to provide savory treats for school parties. A small bar ordered savory treats to sell to customers. Ethan and Avery worked tirelessly, sometimes up to 18 hours a day. It was exhausting but also rewarding. They were building something, and every small success was a victory against everyone who had doubted them. One day, an event would change everything. A local journalist named Derek was visiting the city, doing a feature on small businesses that were thriving despite the economic downturn. He had heard about Ethan and Avery through Mrs. Mildred, who was an aunt of one of his sources. Derek showed up at their house without warning. Avery answered the door with her hands covered in flour, her hair thrown up any old way, exhausted from another day of work. Good afternoon. My name is Derek. I'm a journalist. He introduced himself, showing a badge. I'm doing a feature on local entrepreneurship. Can I talk to you? Avery was suspicious at first. Journalists had publicized the story of their wedding in a cruel way, but Ethan, always more optimistic, invited Derek in. They talked for over 2 hours. Derek asked questions about how the business started, about the challenges they faced, about their work philosophy, and then, inevitably, the question about the wedding came. Is it true you're the couple that got married riding a horse? Avery and Ethan looked at each other. It's true, Avery confirmed, and we were ridiculed for it. Tell me about it, Derek asked, picking up his recorder. And so, for the first time since the wedding, Avery and Ethan told the complete story. They talked about how they planned a simple wedding, because it was all they could afford, but also because they wanted something authentic, something that represented who they really were. They talked about the mockery, about the family that abandoned them, about the difficulties they faced afterward. But they also talked about the good things, about Mrs. Peggy, who gave them their first chance, about Mrs. Mildred, who spread the word, about the community that embraced them when high society rejected them, about the love that grew stronger through every hardship. Derek was visibly moved during the conversation. When he left, he shook both of their hands firmly. "Thank you for sharing your story," he said. "This is going to be a special feature." The article was published a week later, first in the local newspaper, and then it was shared online. The headline read, "The Wedding High Society Mocked, but which taught the true lesson about love and values." Derek's text was moving. He not only told the story of the wedding and the business, but also made a social commentary about inequality, class prejudice, and what truly matters in life. He described Ethan and Avery as examples of dignity and perseverance. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The article went viral on social media. Thousands of people shared it, commented, and expressed admiration. Suddenly, Ethan and Avery were no longer a joke. They were an inspiration. Orders for savory treats increased dramatically. The phone wouldn't stop ringing. They received messages from people in other cities wanting to place orders. Avery and Ethan were completely overwhelmed. "We won't be able to handle this," Avery said, looking at the pile of orders. "We need to hire more people," Ethan concluded. But hiring meant investing more, expanding, taking bigger risks. They talked to Mrs. Janet and Mr. Frank about it. "I think you should take the risk," Mrs. Janet said. "You have an opportunity now. Don't let it slip away." "But what if it goes wrong?" Avery asked. "What if it goes right?" Mr. Frank countered. They decided to hire, first 2 women from the neighborhood, then 3 more. The small kitchen in the backyard became too cramped, so they had to rent a commercial space. The bills increased along with the responsibility. Avery now had employees depending on her, and that was both frightening and exciting. The article's impact, of course, reached Avery's family. Margaret saw the article shared by several people she knew. She read every word, saw the photos of Avery and Ethan working, saw the positive comments from hundreds of people. Richard read it too. Austin read it as well. Victoria, the rich aunt who had offered money at the wedding, also read it, and each of them reacted differently. Victoria was irritated. To her, that report was ridiculous, romanticizing poverty and hardship. Brooke, the cousin, was jealous. She had tried to ridicule Avery, but now Avery was being praised while Brooke was just another rich girl with no purpose. Austin felt something stir inside him. He read about his sister's dedication, her hard work, and wondered what he had done with his own life. He worked at the family company, earned well, but hadn't built anything on his own. Everything he had was inherited or given by his parents. Richard was silent for a long time after reading the article. He looked at Margaret, who was quietly crying. "We were wrong," Margaret said, finally admitting aloud what she had been feeling for months. "We were very wrong with her." "We were wrong," Richard agreed, his voice heavy with regret. Avery's grandmother, Mrs. Dorothy, who had been silent since being turned away from the house after the wedding, decided it was time to act. She was 85 years old and had learned that life was too short to hold grudges. She showed up at Avery and Ethan's new commercial establishment on a rainy afternoon. Avery was at the register when she saw her grandmother walk in. For a second, she was frozen. Then she ran to hug her. "Grandma!" Avery sobbed into her grandmother's shoulder. "You came." "Of course I came, my dear," Mrs. Dorothy said, stroking her granddaughter's hair. "I read the article. I saw what you built. I'm so proud of you." "Did Mum send you?" "No. Your mother doesn't know I'm here," Mrs. Dorothy admitted. "But she wants to come. She just doesn't know how." "She had 4 months to come," Avery said bitterly. "I know. And she was wrong." "They were all wrong." Mrs. Dorothy took Avery's face in her hands. "But Avery, my dear granddaughter, forgiving isn't about them deserving it. It's about setting yourself free." Avery wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. But having her grandmother there meant a lot. They talked for hours, with Mrs. Dorothy telling her how the family was doing, how Margaret cried every night, how Richard had lost that arrogant air he always had. "They're changing," Mrs. Dorothy said. "It might not seem like it, but they are." When her grandmother left, Avery sat thoughtfully. Ethan noticed. "You're thinking about reaching out to your family," he said. "I don't know," Avery answered honestly. "Part of me wants to, but another part is still really angry." "You don't have to decide right now," Ethan hugged her. "When you're ready, you'll decide." But the decision was taken out of Avery's hands. 2 days later, while she was at the shop, the door opened and Margaret walked in. Mother and daughter looked at each other across the room. The movement around them seemed to freeze. The staff sensed the tension and fell silent. Ethan, who was in the kitchen, came to see what was happening. "Avery," Margaret began, her voice trembling. "I need to talk to you." Avery said nothing, just crossed her arms defensively. "I read the article," Margaret continued. "I read every word. I saw the photos. I read the comments. And I—" Her voice faltered. "And you what?" Avery asked, surprised by the harshness in her own voice. "I was wrong," Margaret said, tears starting to fall. "Completely, terribly wrong. About the marriage, about Ethan, about everything." Avery felt something tighten in her chest, but forced herself to stay firm. "You abandoned me," she said. "On the most important day of my life, you just walked out." "I know," Margaret sobbed. "And there's no excuse for that. There's no forgiveness for what I did. I was so obsessed with appearances, with what people would think, that I forgot what mattered most. I forgot that you're my daughter, that your love and happiness should come above everything else." "And now you come here because the article came out?" Avery asked. "Because suddenly I'm respectable again?" "No," Margaret denied vehemently. "I come because I spent 4 months living with regret. 4 months waking up in the middle of the night thinking about you. 4 months wondering if you were okay, if you were eating right, if you were happy. The article just gave me the courage to finally come here." Avery felt her own tears start to fall. "You hurt me, Mom," she said, her voice breaking. "You and Dad hurt me a lot." "I know, my daughter. I know." Margaret took a step forward. "And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it. If you let me." Ethan placed his hand on Avery's shoulder, giving silent support. Avery looked at her mother, seeing for the first time in years the woman behind the facade of a tough businesswoman. She saw vulnerability, genuine regret, pain. "I don't know if I can forgive right now," Avery admitted. "I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness," Margaret said. "I'm just asking for a chance. A chance to get to know my son-in-law better. A chance to be part of your life again, even if it's slowly, even if it takes years." Avery was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. "We can try," she said. "But it's going to take time, Mum. It's going to take a long time for us to fix this." "I'll wait as long as it takes," Margaret promised. And so, mother and daughter took the first step toward reconciliation. It was awkward, painful, but it was a beginning. In the following months, a lot changed. Richard also came to apologize, as did Austin. The conversations were difficult, full of tears and harsh words, but necessary. The family was learning to be a family again, but in a different way, a more honest one, more humble. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing, Avery and Ethan's business kept thriving. They opened a second store, then a third. But they never forgot where they came from. They kept their promise to treat every customer with the same respect, no matter how much money they had. One day, almost a year after the article, they organized a special event, a first anniversary party for the business. They invited everyone who had helped them along the way: Mrs. Peggy, Mrs. Mildred, the old customers, the employees, the family. It was a simple party, held at the same country estate where the wedding had taken place. But this time the atmosphere was completely different. There was love, there was respect, there was gratitude. Margaret and Richard were there, as was Austin. Aunt Victoria, the rich aunt, didn't come, but she sent a gift with an apology card. Brooke, the cousin, showed up with tears in her eyes and asked Avery for forgiveness in person. "I was jealous," Brooke admitted. "I always was. You had the courage to do what you wanted, and I always only did what was expected of me. When you got married that way, I saw how free you were, and I hated you for it because I couldn't be like that." "You still can be," Avery said, hugging her cousin. "It's never too late to change." During the party, Ethan was asked to give a speech. He wasn't much for words, but that day he had things to say. "A year ago, Avery and I got married in a way that a lot of people thought was ridiculous," he began, and there were embarrassed laughs from some people in the audience. "We were judged, we were mocked, we were abandoned, and I won't lie, it was extremely painful." Avery was beside him, holding his hand. "But that pain taught us something important," Ethan continued. "It taught us who really cares. It taught us the value of hard work. It taught us humility. And most importantly, it taught us that other people's opinions don't define who we are." There was applause, and Ethan waited for it to die down before continuing. "Today we have a thriving business. We have 3 stores. We have 15 employees. But what we have most and what no amount of money can buy is dignity. Dignity in knowing that everything we achieved came from our own effort, with our own hands." Avery took the microphone. "And we want to thank everyone who believed in us when no one else did," she said, looking especially at Mrs. Peggy and Mrs. Mildred. "You saved our lives, literally." Then she looked at her parents. "I also thank my family, who learned that love is more important than appearances. It was a tough road to get here, but we made it, together." Margaret was openly crying, with Richard beside her, also emotional. When the party ended and the guests left, Avery and Ethan were alone at the country estate, watching the sunset. "Do you regret it?" Ethan asked. "Everything you went through because of me?" Avery turned to look at him, with that same intense gaze she had when they first met. "Never," she answered without hesitation. "Because everything I went through made me who I am today, and I like who I am. Even after losing so much?" "I didn't lose that much," Avery corrected. "I gained so much more. I gained you. I gained self-awareness. I gained strength. I gained the certainty that I can overcome anything." Ethan kissed her, and at that moment, with the sun setting behind them at the same place where they had gotten married a year ago on horseback, they knew they had made the right choice, because in the end it wasn't riches or status that made a life worthwhile. It was love. It was dedication. It was the ability to get back up after every fall. And they had proven against all odds that they had all of that. But life never stops testing people. 3 months after that birthday party, when everything seemed to be finally heading towards stability, a new challenge arose. Avery started feeling a different kind of tired. It wasn't just work fatigue. It was something deeper. She fainted twice at the store, and Ethan insisted she see a doctor. "It's probably just exhaustion," Avery tried to downplay it. "We've been working too hard. Or it could be something serious," Ethan countered. "Please, Avery, go to the doctor." She went, more to calm her husband than out of genuine concern. The doctor, Dr. Miller, a middle-aged man with a worried expression, ran several tests. "Avery, how many hours a day are you working?" he asked, analyzing the results. "About 16, sometimes 18, she admitted. "You need to rest," Dr. Miller said seriously. "Your body is at its limit. If you keep this up, there will be serious consequences." Your heart is overworked, your blood pressure is high, and you're anemic. It's only a matter of time before something worse happens." Avery listened but didn't fully absorb it. She had a business to run, employees depending on her, customers waiting. How could she just stop? But her body decided for her. A week later, Avery fainted again, but this time she hit her head on the way down and had to be taken to the hospital. Ethan was desperate. Mrs. Janet and Margaret met in the hospital waiting room, united by their worry for Avery. "She worked too hard," Margaret said, tears in her eyes. "She never learned when to stop." "She got that from you," Mrs. Janet replied, but there was no judgment in her voice, just an observation. When Avery woke up, she found Ethan holding her hand, his eyes red from crying. "You scared me," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry," Avery murmured. "The doctor said you need to take at least a full month off. No work, no stress." "But the business—" "The business can wait," Ethan interrupted firmly. "You can't. I can't lose you, Avery. Not after everything we've been through together." Avery saw the seriousness in his eyes and finally understood. She had been so focused on proving her worth, on showing she could succeed, that she had forgotten to take care of herself. The days in the hospital were tough. Avery wasn't used to staying still, to depending on others. Margaret visited her every day, bringing fruit, books, her presence. The relationship between mother and daughter was slowly rebuilding, with each visit being a brick in that new foundation. "When I was your age, I also worked too much," Margaret confessed during one of those visits. "I thought it was the only way to prove my worth, but I almost lost everything because of it. I almost lost your father, almost lost you and Austin. Don't make the same mistake I did, Avery." "But I have so much to prove," Avery said. "After everything that happened, I need to show that I can—" "You've already proven it." Margaret held her daughter's hand. "You built a thriving business from scratch. You earned the community's respect. You showed more strength and dignity than I ever showed in my entire life. There's nothing left to prove." Those words echoed in Avery's mind for days. Had she really been trying to prove something? To whom? To the family that had already apologized? To society that now admired her? Or to herself? When she left the hospital, Avery had to face a different reality. Ethan had fully taken over managing the 3 stores with the help of Mrs. Janet and the senior employees, and he was doing well, better than Avery expected. "You don't need me as much as I thought," she commented one day, half joking, half serious. "I always need you," Ethan replied, hugging her. "But the business? The business can run without you being physically present all the time. You built a good structure, you trained the employees well. They know what to do." It was true. Avery had been so meticulous in training each employee, in establishing clear processes, that the business ran like clockwork, even without her constant presence. But accepting that meant giving up control. She had gotten used to exercising. During her month of forced rest, Avery had time to reflect on many things. She realized she had been running from something through work, running from the pain of family abandonment, running from the memories of the humiliating marriage, running from the fear of not being good enough. But now, forced to stop, she needed to face all of that. One afternoon, while sitting on the porch of the house watching the neighborhood children play in the street, Austin showed up without warning. "Can I sit?" he asked, looking uncomfortable. "Sure." They sat in silence for a few minutes. The relationship between siblings had always been complicated, and the events of the past year hadn't helped. "I envied you," Austin said suddenly. Avery turned to look at him, surprised. "You envied me? Why?" "Because you had courage," Austin explained. "Courage to do what you wanted, to stand up to everyone, to build something of your own. I never had that. I always did what was expected. I worked at Sterling Boutiques because that's what I was supposed to do. I dated the girl my parents approved of. I bought the car that gave status, but none of that made me happy." "Austin." "No, let me finish," he asked. "On the day of your wedding, when I chose to leave, I wasn't choosing our parents, I was running from facing the fact that I'm a coward, that you are stronger than I will ever be." "You're not a coward," Avery said gently. "You were just doing the best you could with what you had." "But it wasn't the best," Austin insisted. "And now I see you, even after almost working yourself to death, still more fulfilled than I have ever been. Because you are living your truth, and I am living everyone else's truth." That conversation opened a door between the siblings that had been closed for years. They started talking more, understanding each other better. Austin even began to question his own choices, thinking about maybe leaving the family business and trying something on his own. While Avery recovered, the world around her didn't stop. The business kept growing, but with that growth came new problems. A big competitor, a chain of savory treats that had several stores in neighboring cities, saw the success of Avery and Ethan and decided to open a branch in their town. That chain had capital, aggressive marketing, competitive prices. When they opened, they had a big promotion, savory treats at half price for the entire first month. Many of Avery and Ethan's customers, especially the more price-sensitive ones, switched to the competitor. Ethan got worried. Sales dropped significantly. "We can't compete with their prices," he told Avery, who was better but still hadn't returned to work completely. "They're a big chain. They have resources we don't." "Then we don't compete on price," Avery replied, her mind already working on solutions. "We compete on quality, on service, on the personal relationship we have with customers." But it was easier said than done. As the weeks passed, more customers migrated to the competition. One of the 3 stores was operating at a loss. Ethan suggested closing it, but Avery resisted. "If we close one store, it looks like we're giving up," she argued. "But if we keep a store that's only losing money, we'll go under," Ethan countered. They were facing their first major disagreement in the business. Each had their own perspective, and both made sense. The tension between them began to grow. One night, after yet another argument about finances, Ethan left the house to take a walk. Avery stayed behind, feeling lost. She was scared. Scared of losing the business, scared of losing Ethan, scared of everything going back to the way it was at the start, when they had nothing. Margaret showed up the next day, as if she had sensed her daughter needed her. "You look terrible," she said, walking in without ceremony. "What happened?" Avery told her about the competitor, about sales dropping, about the disagreement with Ethan. "And you're scared," Margaret concluded. "I'm really scared," Avery admitted, and the tears started to fall. "Mom, we worked so hard to build this. If we lose everything now—" "You're not going to lose it," Margaret said with conviction. "You know why? Because you have something that no big chain has. You have history. You have heart. You have a genuine connection with this community." "But is that enough?" "It's been enough so far, hasn't it?" Margaret smiled. "Avery, you and Ethan built this business from scratch, with no one's help in the beginning. Facing prejudice and rejection, you've already proven you can overcome any obstacle. This is just another one." Her mother's words brought some comfort, but Avery knew that good intentions didn't pay the bills. They needed a real strategy. It was Mrs. Peggy, ironically, who came up with the idea that would change everything. "Why don't you throw an event?" she suggested during a visit. "A community event, something that shows you're part of this community, not just another business." The idea planted a seed in Avery's mind. What if they organized a big community party, something free, open to everyone, where they served their savory treats and celebrated their connection with the neighborhood? She talked to Ethan about it that night. They were still in an uncomfortable silence with each other after the recent arguments, but the idea was good enough to break the ice. "It's going to cost money we don't have to spare," Ethan pointed out. "It's going to be an investment," Avery argued, "in our reputation, in our relationship with the community. And if it doesn't work? And if it does?" Ethan looked at her, and in that moment he saw the same determined woman who had chosen to get married on horseback, defying everyone. He smiled. "Let's do it," he decided. They organized the event for the following month. They called it the Community Party. They invited all the neighbors, long-time customers, people who had helped them along the way. They promised free food, live music with local musicians, and activities for children. The preparation was intense. They used the savings they had, relied on help from all the employees, and mobilized the entire family. Even Austin helped. working on the decorations. Margaret and Richard got personally involved, contributing to some of the costs without Avery knowing. They wanted to help, but they knew Avery was proud and might refuse direct financial help. So they discreetly paid for the musicians and the setup, letting Avery think she had gotten miracle prices. The day of the party arrived. It was a sunny Saturday. Perfect. They set everything up in a large empty lot that a friend of Mr. Frank had lent them. Tables, chairs, a small stage structure, colorful decorations. But as the hours passed and the start time drew near, Avery began to get nervous. What if no one showed up? What if they had spent all that money for nothing? "Relax," Ethan said, holding her hand. "People will come." And they did. In the first 15 minutes, there were already 100 people. In an hour, there were hundreds. Whole families, kids running around, seniors chatting, young people dancing. The community had shown up in full force. Mrs. Mildred was there with her whole family, Mrs. Peggy too. The neighbors, the long-time customers, even some new customers who had met Avery and Ethan through the newspaper article. It was a beautiful celebration of unity and gratitude. Avery and Ethan personally served the savory treats, talked to each person, listened to their stories, and each conversation reinforced something Avery already knew in her heart. They weren't just a business. They were part of that community. A 70-year-old man, Mr. Otis, approached Avery with tears in his eyes. "Young lady, I want to thank you," he said. "Thank me for what, Mr. Otis?" 3 months ago, my wife got sick. I didn't have money for a recovery party for her when she got out of the hospital. You made free savory treats for us. I'll never forget that. Avery didn't even remember that specific case. There were so many that she and Ethan had helped over time. But for Mr. Otis, it had meant the world. Stories like that repeated throughout the party. Person after person came to thank them, to share how Avery and Ethan had impacted their lives. It wasn't just about the savory treats. It was about dignity, about being treated with respect, about feeling valued. When the party was at its peak, something unexpected happened. A big new car parked near the event. Out stepped the owners of the competing chain, a well-dressed middle-aged couple, clearly from a different social class. They walked through the event, watching everything with expressions hard to read. Avery saw them and felt her stomach tighten. What were they doing there? The man, who introduced himself as Gregory Vance, different from Frank, Ethan's father-in-law, approached Ethan. "Are you the owner?" Vance asked. "I'm one of the owners," Ethan replied, cautious. "I came to see what you were doing," Vance said. "I've heard about you. The wedding story, the newspaper article, all the hype." Ethan stiffened, ready to defend himself. "And I came here thinking I'd find an amateur business. People who don't know anything about real management," Vance continued. "But I was wrong." "Wrong?" Avery approached, joining the conversation. "This here," Vance gestured toward the party, toward the hundreds of happy people, "isn't about business. It's about community. It's about values. And that's something money can't buy, something a big chain can't replicate." His wife, Cynthia, nodded. "We have stores in 5 cities," she said. "But in none of them do we have what you have here. That loyalty, that love. People don't come to us because they love us. They come because we're convenient, cheap, but with you it's different." "Why are you telling us this?" Avery asked, confused. "Because I want to make a proposal," Vance said. "How about instead of competing, we partner up?" Avery and Ethan exchanged surprised glances. "What kind of partnership?" Ethan asked. "You keep your identity, your autonomy," Vance explained, "but you get access to our suppliers, our better prices, our expansion expertise. In exchange, we learn from you about how to build real connections with communities." It was a tempting offer, but also risky. Avery was afraid of losing the essence of what they had built if they joined a big chain. "We need to think about it," Avery said. "Of course." Vance handed her a business card. "Take your time, but know that I deeply respect what you've built, and I think together we could do something even bigger." After the couple left, Avery and Ethan remained thoughtful for the rest of the party. It was a big opportunity, but also potentially complicated. When the party ended and they were helping clean up, Mrs. Janet approached them. "You're thinking about that offer," she said. It wasn't a question. "We are," Avery admitted. "And you're afraid of losing who you are if you accept." "Exactly." "Avery, Ethan," Mrs. Janet held both their hands. "You won't lose who you are. Because who you are isn't in the size of the business or how many stores you have. It's here," she pointed to both their hearts. "It's in the values you carry, and no one can take that away." In the following days, Avery and Ethan carefully weighed the proposal. They talked to Margaret, who had business experience. They talked to Mr. Frank, who had the wisdom of years. They talked to Austin, who had studied business administration. "From a financial standpoint, it makes sense," Austin analyzed. "You'd have access to resources that on your own would take years to get, but there need to be clear clauses protecting your autonomy." "And if they try to change the way we work?" Avery questioned. "Then you end the partnership," Margaret said simply. "But you can write a contract that protects you. I know a good lawyer who can help." After 2 weeks of deliberation, Avery and Ethan decided to accept the offer, but with clear conditions. They would maintain full control over customer service, quality standards, and hiring decisions. The chain would provide logistical and financial support, but wouldn't interfere with day-to-day operations. The contract was negotiated and signed, and the results were almost immediate. With access to better suppliers, costs went down. With marketing support from the chain, more customers showed up, but Avery and Ethan kept the soul of the business intact. The store that had been operating at a loss became profitable again. They were able to give raises to employees. They even opened a 4th store, this one in a neighboring town. But with renewed success came new pressures. Avery found herself traveling more, attending meetings with executives from the chain, learning about business aspects she had never imagined. Ethan felt increasingly distant from her. They barely saw each other during the week. When they finally had time together, they were too exhausted to really talk. One night, 6 months into the partnership, Ethan exploded. "I feel like I've lost my wife," he said. "You're always traveling, always in meetings, always busy. When was the last time we had a real conversation? A night together?" Avery got defensive. "I'm doing this for us," she replied, "to secure our future." "But what kind of future is that if we don't have a present?" Ethan countered. "Avery, I didn't marry you to be rich. I married you to have a life together, and lately it feels like we don't have that anymore." Ethan's words hit Avery hard. She had been so focused on growing the business, on seizing opportunities, that she had forgotten what really mattered. "You're right," she admitted, tears starting to fall. "I got lost again, just like when I got sick. I'm still running from something through work." "What are you running from, Avery?" Ethan asked gently, sitting beside her on the couch. "I don't know," she sobbed. "Maybe fear. Fear that if I stop, if I relax, everything will fall apart. Fear of being that girl humiliated in her own marriage again." "But you're not that girl anymore," Ethan held her face. "You're a strong, successful, respected woman. You don't have to prove anything to anyone anymore." "But it feels like I do," Avery admitted. "It feels like if I stop running, stop working, stop building, everything will disappear." This conversation was a turning point for Avery Sterling. She realized she needed help, professional help. She started therapy with a psychologist named Dr. Gray, a woman in her 60s who had a calm and welcoming wisdom. In the sessions, Avery began to unpack everything: the trauma of the marriage, the pain of being abandoned by her family, the constant fear of not being good enough, the compulsive need to prove her worth through work and success. "You're using work as an escape mechanism," Dr. Gray explained in one session. "Every time uncomfortable feelings come up, you throw yourself into work so you don't have to deal with them." "But work is important," Avery argued. "It is. But it can't be the only thing. You need to learn to become comfortable with discomfort. You need to learn that your value doesn't come from what you do, but from who you are." That therapeutic work was long and difficult. But gradually, Avery began to change. She learned to delegate more. She learned to trust the team. She learned to say no to opportunities that would require her to give up time with Ethan. She reduced her travel. She started setting aside 2 nights a week just for her and Ethan. No work discussions, no phones, just the two of them. They started doing simple things they had stopped doing, watching movies together, cooking together, walking through the city, talking. Their marriage grew stronger again. And Avery realized something fundamental. She had been happier when the business was small and simple, when she and Ethan worked side by side in Mrs. Peggy's kitchen, than she was now with 4 stores and a partnership with a big chain. That realization made her question everything. Was financial success worth it if it cost her peace of mind and happiness? She talked to Ethan about it. What if we scaled back, she suggested. What if we closed some stores and simplified everything? Are you serious? Ethan was surprised. After everything we worked to grow. But are we happier now than when it was just the two of us making savory treats in our little house? Avery asked. Ethan was silent, thinking. And then he realized she was right. They weren't happier. They had more money, more status, more recognition, but less time together, less peace, less genuine satisfaction. What do you suggest? He asked. Let's talk to Vance. Let's see if we can renegotiate the partnership to something smaller. Maybe keep just 2 stores instead of 4. Get back to basics. It was a difficult conversation with Gregory and Cynthia. They didn't understand at first. For them, success meant always growing, always expanding. But when Avery explained about quality of life, about preserving what truly mattered, Cynthia related to that. I understand, Cynthia said. When we started our chain, Gregory and I had that same connection you have. But as we grew, we lost it. Now we have money, but we barely see each other. We barely have time to live. They renegotiated the contract. Avery and Ethan would keep 2 stores, the most profitable ones, and let go of the other 2, which would be fully taken over by the chain. It would be a significant reduction in income, but a huge gain in quality of life. When the news spread, many people didn't understand. How could someone choose to earn less on purpose? But those who truly knew Avery and Ethan understood perfectly. They're going back to their roots, Mrs. Peggy commented to Mrs. Mildred. They're remembering what really matters. With fewer stores to manage, Avery and Ethan returned to working side by side every day. They no longer needed to hire so many employees, so they kept only a small dedicated team. The atmosphere became more familiar, more intimate, and something surprising happened. Customer satisfaction increased. Because Avery and Ethan were more present, more attentive, more involved in every detail, the customers felt the difference. Margaret watched all of this with a mixture of admiration and reflection. She herself had dedicated her entire life to growing the business, never stopping to question whether it was worth it. Seeing her daughter's choice, she began to reevaluate her own priorities. One day, Margaret did something that surprised the whole family. She announced that she was going to retire and hand over the management of the company to Austin and a team of managers. I spent 60 years working, she said during a family dinner. I built an empire, gained recognition, had success. But I lost a lot along the way. I lost moments with you, I lost the chance to get to know my own children better. I won't lose any more. Richard was shocked at first, but then he understood. He himself had realized how work had consumed their lives. Maybe it's time for the 2 of us to live a little too, he said, taking Margaret's hand. They started traveling, something they had never truly done. Small trips to nearby places, nothing elaborate, just enjoying time together. And little by little, Margaret and Richard rediscovered the relationship they had put on the back burner for decades. Austin, taking on more responsibilities at the company, also went through a transformation. He had a purpose now. He was building something of his own, even if it was on the foundation left by his parents. He started dating a public school teacher, Megan Rose, a simple woman who accepted him for who he was, not for the money he had. She reminds me of you, Austin confessed to Avery one day. She's not impressed by appearances. She sees people for real. Avery was happy to see her brother finally find his way. 2 years had passed since the wedding. Avery and Ethan were preparing a special celebration for their 2nd anniversary. But this time, it would be even simpler than the first. Just the 2 of them, their immediate families and their closest friends. They went back to the same country estate where the wedding had been. The owner of the country estate, Mr. Hank, had become a friend of theirs and offered the space for free. "You taught this city a lesson," Mr. Hanks said. "You taught me that what matters is not how much you have, but how much you love." On the night of the celebration, with the starry sky above them, Avery and Ethan renewed their vows. But this time, there were no tears of pain or humiliation. There was only pure love and gratitude. "2 years ago, we got married riding a horse," Ethan said, holding Avery's hands. And everyone laughed. Everyone judged. Everyone said we were wrong. "But we proved them wrong," Avery continued. "Not because we got rich or because we succeeded in business, but because we stayed true to our values, because we chose love over pride, authenticity over appearances." Margaret and Richard watched with tears of joy. Mrs. Janet and Mr. Frank were hugging, proud. Austin and Megan Rose were also there, as were Mrs. Peggy, Mrs. Mildred, Mr. Harold, and so many others who had been part of this journey. "I look back and I regret nothing," Avery said, her voice filled with emotion. "Every pain, every tear, every difficult moment brought us here. And here is exactly where I want to be." "With me," Ethan added. "With you," Avery confirmed, and they kissed under the stars. After the ceremony, during the small party that followed, something touching happened. Mrs. Dorothy, Avery's grandmother, who was now 90 years old, asked to speak. "When I was young, I married for convenience," she began, her voice frail but firm. "My husband, Avery's grandfather, had money. My family was poor and needed help, so I married him even though I didn't love him." It was the first time anyone had heard that story. Avery was in shock. "We had a good life together," Mrs. Dorothy continued. "He was a good man, he treated me well, but I never loved him the way I should have, and that always pained me. It always made me wonder what it would have been like if I had had the courage to follow my heart." She looked directly at Avery. "When you married Ethan, even knowing you would lose everything, I was so proud, because you did what I never had the courage to do. You chose love. And because of that, even with all the difficulties, you are happier than I ever was." Her grandmother's words touched Avery deeply. She hugged Mrs. Dorothy, now understanding where her grandmother's insistence on defending true love came from. As the night went on and conversations flowed, Avery realized something incredible. There, on that simple country estate, under those trees, was a diverse group of people gathered. Rich and poor, young and old, people from different stories and backgrounds, but all united by something in common: the belief that love and dignity are worth more than any material wealth. Victoria, the aunt who had offered money on the wedding day, was not physically present but had sent a letter. Avery read it aloud with her permission. "Avery and Ethan, I don't have the courage to show up in person because I'm still ashamed of what I did. But I want you to know that you taught me something that my 70 years of life hadn't taught me. That true wealth isn't in bank vaults. It's in hearts. I have a lot of money, but I am deeply unhappy. You have little, but you are immensely happy. Who is really rich here? Thank you for showing me what I was doing wrong my whole life. I hope one day I have the courage to apologize in person." The letter moved many of those present. It was a testament to how Avery and Ethan had impacted people they never even imagined. When the party was ending and the guests were starting to leave, Ethan pulled Avery aside to a more secluded corner of the country estate. "I have a surprise for you," he said. "Another one?" Avery laughed. The whole night had been full of emotional surprises. "This one is special." Ethan took a small box out of his pocket. Avery was confused. They were already married, they already had rings. What could it be? When she opened the box, she saw 2 new rings. They weren't expensive or flashy, but they were beautiful, simple, yet meaningful. "At our first wedding, we didn't have money for nice rings," Ethan explained. "We bought the cheapest ones we could find, and that's fine, they meant a lot to me. But I wanted to give you something that represents where we are now. These rings, I made them myself." Avery looked closer and saw it was true. The rings had small imperfections that showed they were handmade, but they were perfect precisely because of that. "Ethan," she murmured, emotional, Every imperfection here represents a challenge we overcame, he explained. Every mark is a reminder that we got through it together, and we'll keep getting through everything together. They swapped the old rings for the new ones, symbolically marking not a new beginning, but a strengthened continuation of their journey together. As they drove home that night, in the same old car they had used to deliver savory treats 2 years ago, Avery looked at her husband and felt a deep peace. "Are you happy?" she asked. "I am very happy," Ethan answered without hesitation. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible." They drove in comfortable silence for the rest of the way, each lost in thoughts about everything they had lived through, everything they had achieved. Not in material terms, but in terms of personal growth and love. The next day, life returned to its normal routine. Avery and Ethan went to work at the 2 stores they kept. They fried savory pastries, served customers, cleaned the kitchen. Honest, hard work, but satisfying. One morning, a few weeks after the birthday celebration, a woman walked into the main store. She was around 50, dressed simply but neatly. There was something in her eyes that Avery recognized immediately. It was the look of someone carrying a heavy burden. "Good morning," Avery greeted. "Can I help you?" "You're Avery, right?" the woman asked, her voice hesitant. "Yes, I am." "My name is Sandra. Sandra Parker," the woman introduced herself. "I read about you in the paper, that article from a while back, and I need some advice." Avery realized this wasn't about savory pastries. She gestured to one of the tables, and they sat down. "What happened, Sandra?" "My daughter, Tiffany, is getting married," Sandra began, tears already forming. "She's 23. And the young man she chose, Logan, he's poor. He works as a gas deliveryman. He makes very little." Avery could already see where this was going. "And you don't approve?" she said softly. "I don't want her to struggle," Sandra explained, gripping Avery's hands. "I raised her alone after her father abandoned us. I worked 3 jobs to give her a good life. I paid for college, gave her the best of everything, and now she wants to throw it all away to marry a guy who can barely pay his own bills?" "But does she love him?" Avery asked. "She says she does," Sandra replied, "but love doesn't pay the bills, does it? Love doesn't put food on the table." Avery felt as if she were looking at an alternate version of Margaret, her own mother before the regret and reconciliation. "Can I tell you something, Sandra? Please." "When I got married, my family thought exactly the way you're thinking," Avery began. "They abandoned me on my wedding day because they thought I was making a terrible mistake. And yes, it was hard. It was very hard. There were times when I didn't know if we'd have enough food for the next week." Sandra listened intently, the tears now streaming freely. "But you know what I learned," Avery continued. "I learned that hardships don't destroy true love. They strengthen it. Ethan and I went through things that many couples will never experience, and it united us in a way no material comfort ever could." "But wasn't it horrible going through all that?" "It was hard," Avery admitted. "But it wasn't horrible, because we had each other. And if I could go back in time, I'd do it all exactly the same way." "So you think I should support Tiffany's wedding?" "I think you should remember that a mother's support is one of the most valuable things there is," Avery said. "My mother didn't support me at first, and that left a deep mark on me. When she finally apologized, we were able to reconnect, but there are wounds that never fully heal. Don't do to your daughter what my mother did to me." Sandra was silent for a long time, processing everything. "I just want what's best for her," she finally said. "And what's best for her might be exactly what she's choosing," Avery replied. "Even if you don't understand it now, even if it seems like a mistake, trust the upbringing you gave her, trust the values you taught her, and most importantly, trust your daughter." When Sandra left the store half an hour later, she seemed different, lighter. She thanked Avery with a tight hug and promised she would try to support Tiffany. That conversation made Avery realize something important. Her and Ethan's story had become bigger than them. It had become a beacon for other people facing similar situations. People torn between following their hearts or following what was expected. In the following days, more people began seeking out Avery and Ethan, not to buy savories but to talk, to ask for advice, to share their own stories. It was as if their business had turned into something more than just a simple establishment. It had become a meeting point, a place of hope. Ethan noticed it too. "We've become like unofficial counselors," he commented one night while they were closing up the shop. "It's strange, isn't it?" Avery laughed. "We can barely solve our own problems sometimes, yet people come to us looking for answers." Maybe that's exactly why, Ethan reflected. Because we don't pretend to have all the answers. We just share what we've learned from our mistakes. Avery liked that interpretation. They weren't better than anyone else. They were just two people who had gone through hardships and come out the other side with lessons learned. A month later, Sandra came back to the shop. But this time she wasn't alone. With her was a pretty young woman of 23, clearly her daughter Tiffany, and a shy young man who must have been Logan. "Avery, I wanted you to meet my daughter and my future son-in-law," Sandra said, and there was pride in her voice. Avery talked with the young couple and saw in them a reflection of herself and Ethan 2 years ago. The same determination, the same genuine love, the same willingness to face anything together. "Mom told me about you," Tiffany said, "about your marriage and everything you went through. It gave me the strength to keep going, not to give up even when things got hard." "Things got hard?" Avery asked. "My whole family was against it," Tiffany explained. "Only my mom, after talking to you, supported me. The uncles, the grandparents, everyone said I was making a mistake, but I remembered your story. If you made it, so can I." Avery was deeply touched. She never imagined her story could inspire others in such a direct and personal way. "When's your wedding?" Ethan asked. "In 3 months," Logan answered, speaking for the first time. "And we wanted to know if you could make the savories." "It would be an honor," Avery said. In the following months, stories like this became more common. Avery and Ethan were impacting lives in ways they had never imagined, and that brought a satisfaction that no financial success had ever brought. But with this new visibility came new challenges as well. Brooke, the cousin who had mocked Avery's wedding on social media, showed up at the shop one day. Avery hadn't seen her since the wedding anniversary party, when Brooke had briefly apologized. "Can I talk to you?" Brooke asked, looking nervous. They sat down and Brooke began to speak. She told about her own life, about how she had been living a lie, dating a guy she didn't love but who was approved by the family, working at a job she hated but that had prestige, living in an expensive apartment but empty of any warmth. "I go through my days on autopilot," Brooke confessed. "I wake up, go to work, come home, sleep. I don't feel anything. I don't live anything. And when I see you, I see that you have something I'll never have." "What do you think I have?" Avery asked. "Authenticity," Brooke replied. "You're real. You live according to your values. And me. I'm a fraud. Everything about me is fake. Even my smile." Avery saw the genuine pain in her cousin and felt compassion. "It's never too late to change, Brooke." "But how?" Brooke asked, desperate. "How do I undo 30 years of living the wrong way?" "One step at a time," Avery answered. "You start by doing one thing that's true, one thing that you really want, not what others expect, and then another and another. Until, little by little, you build an authentic life." "But I'm going to lose everything," Brooke argued. "If I break up with Blake, if I quit my job, my family will—" "Your family will judge you," Avery completed. "Just like they judged me. But you know what? Their approval isn't worth the price of your happiness. Nothing is worth that price." Brooke left the store deep in thought. Avery didn't know if she would have the courage to change. But at least she had planted the seed. Weeks later, Avery got a call from Margaret. "Brooke broke up with Blake," Margaret said, shocked, "and she quit her job. Aunt Victoria is furious. She says you're putting crazy ideas into people's heads." "I only told the truth," Avery defended herself. "That happiness is more important than appearances." "I know," Margaret sighed. "And deep down, Victoria knows it too. She's just scared that if everyone starts living authentically, the world she built will collapse." It was a profound observation. Avery realized that people like Victoria felt threatened by stories like hers because they exposed the fragility of the value system they had devoted their entire lives to maintaining. But Avery wasn't going to stop being who she was to make Victoria or anyone else comfortable. She had learned the hard way that living authentically was the only way to live that was worth it. Months passed. The business was steady. It wasn't growing explosively, but it was healthy. Avery and Ethan had found a balance between work and personal life that worked for them. One morning, Avery woke up feeling nauseous. At first, she thought it was something she ate, but when the nausea persisted for several days, she decided to take a pregnancy test. Positive. Avery stared at that result for long minutes, emotions tumbling inside her. Fear, joy, anxiety, hope, all at once. When Ethan came home that night, she was sitting in the living room, the test in her hand. "I'm pregnant," she said without preamble. Ethan froze for a second, then a huge smile spread across his face. "Really?" he asked, rushing to hug her. "Really," Avery confirmed, and then she started crying. "But Ethan, are we ready for this? Having a child is a lot of work, a lot of expense, and we're doing well now, but we'll be fine." Ethan gently interrupted her. "Avery, we've been through much worse than raising a child. We'll manage." And so, a new journey began. Avery worked through her pregnancy because that was who she was. But she learned to delegate more, to ask for help when she needed it. Margaret was ecstatic at the news that she was going to be a grandmother and constantly showed up with things for the baby. Mrs. Janet was equally excited. The two grandmothers, who had started out as adversaries, were now almost friends, united by the anticipation of the child to come. The delivery was difficult. There were complications. For a few agonizing hours, Ethan thought he might lose Avery. But she fought with the same determination she had shown in everything in life and came out the other side, tired, bruised, but alive, and in her arms a beautiful girl. "What should we call her?" Ethan asked, gazing in wonder at their daughter. "Dorothy," Avery said, in honor of Grandma. She was the one who always believed in true love. Dorothy, the great-grandmother, cried when she found out. She was 91 now, and each day was a blessing. Holding her great-granddaughter with her name was one of the happiest moments of her long life. Motherhood transformed Avery in ways she hadn't expected. She became even more aware of the example she was setting. She didn't want Dorothy to grow up in a world where appearances mattered more than character, where money defined worth, where love was secondary to status. When Dorothy turned 6 months old, Avery went back to working part-time. But she had changed her priorities again. The business was now clearly a part of her life, not her whole life. One day, 2.5 years after her original wedding, Avery received an unexpected invitation. Derek, the journalist who had written the article that changed everything, was organizing a talk on entrepreneurship and values. He wanted Avery and Ethan to be speakers. "I don't know how to speak in public," Avery protested. "You don't need to be a professional speaker," Derek argued. "You just need to tell your story. People want to hear that." Reluctantly, Avery and Ethan accepted. The talk would be in a small auditorium in the city with a capacity of about 200 people. Avery thought they'd be lucky if 50 showed up, but on the day of the event, the auditorium was completely packed. There were people sitting on the floor, in the aisles, standing in the back. More than 300 people had come. Avery was more nervous than she had ever been, but when she stepped onto the stage and looked at all those people, something shifted inside her. She saw hopeful faces, faces that seemed to be searching for something she could offer. She told her story, from the very beginning. The mocked wedding, the family that abandoned her, the financial struggles, the exhaustion, the doubts, but also the love, the overcoming, the growth, the reconciliation, the peace. Ethan added his own perspective. What it was like to see the woman he loved being humiliated, what it was like to feel powerless to protect her from all that cruelty, what it was like to work to exhaustion, trying to build a better life. The people listened in absolute silence. Many cried. And when Avery and Ethan finished, the ovation was deafening. During the Q&A session that followed, the questions were deep and personal. People wanted to know how to deal with family rejection, how to keep love alive during financial difficulties, how not to lose yourself in the struggle for survival. Avery answered every question honestly. She didn't pretend to have all the answers. She shared what she had learned, but also admitted where she was still learning. A woman in the audience stood up and said something that stayed with Avery for a long time. "You give us permission to be imperfect, to struggle and fail and get back up. Thank you for that." After the talk, dozens of people came to speak with Avery and Ethan. They shared their own stories. They asked for advice. They asked for hope. Driving home that night, Avery was exhausted but deeply fulfilled. "We did something special today," she said to Ethan. "We always do something special," Ethan replied. "Every day we choose to live authentically, we do something special." In the following months, more speaking invitations came. Avery and Ethan began to be known not only as the owners of Sterling's savory treats, but as motivators, as living proof that it was possible to live according to your values, even when the whole world was against you. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. With visibility came critics too. People on social media who said that Avery and Ethan were selling poverty as something noble. Others who argued that they only made it because they got lucky, not because they made the right choices. Some criticisms hurt. Others were clearly driven by envy or bad faith. Avery had to learn to distinguish between constructive criticism that helped her grow and destructive criticism that just wanted to tear her down. Dr. Gray, the psychologist, helped her a lot in that process. "You can't control what people think of you," Dr. Gray said during a session. "You can only control who you are and how you react. There's always going to be someone who doesn't like you. Always going to be someone who doesn't understand your choices. And that's okay." Over time, Avery developed a thicker skin. She learned not to read every comment on social media. She learned to focus on the positive messages, on the lives she was touching, not the criticism from those who would never get it. Dorothy was growing up fast. At 1 year old, she was a cheerful and curious child. Avery and Ethan worked hard to raise their daughter with the same values that guided their own lives. They wanted her to understand that wealth didn't define character, that appearances weren't as important as essence. One day, while taking Dorothy for a walk in the stroller through the park, Avery ran into Victoria, the aunt who had offered money at the wedding and who had kept her distance ever since. "Avery," Victoria called out, seeming hesitant. Avery stopped, surprised. Victoria approached and looked at the stroller where Dorothy was sleeping peacefully. "She's beautiful," Victoria said, with a softness Avery had never seen in her. "Thank you." "May I sit down?" Victoria asked, pointing to a nearby bench. They sat down, and for a moment they stayed silent, just watching Dorothy. "I watched your talk," Victoria finally said. "I was in the back of the auditorium. You probably didn't see me." "I really didn't," Avery admitted. "Why did you go?" "Curiosity at first," Victoria confessed. "But as you spoke, something changed. I saw everything I had done wrong in my life reflected in your words." "Aunt Victoria—" "No, let me speak," Victoria requested. "I'm 75 now. I built a fortune. I have houses, cars, jewelry. But I have no one. My children only visit me when they need money. My grandchildren hardly know me. I spent my life accumulating things and forgot to accumulate love." Avery saw tears in her aunt's eyes and felt her heart tighten. "I was cruel to you that day," Victoria continued. "I tried to buy your dignity, and you refused me with such class, such strength. I should have learned the lesson right then, but I was too proud. And now? Now I'm just a lonely old woman who realized too late what really matters," Victoria said, wiping her tears. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that you were right about everything." Avery took her aunt's hand and squeezed it. "It's never too late to change, Aunt. Look at my mom. She changed. We reconnected. You can do that with your family too." "They hate me," Victoria murmured. "They don't hate you. They just don't really know you. Because you never let them," Avery said. "But you can start now. You can start by being vulnerable, by being honest, by being human. Victoria stayed with Avery in the park for another hour. They talked about life, about regrets, about second chances. When they finally said goodbye, there was an understanding between them that had never existed before. 3 years had passed since the wedding. Avery and Ethan were now celebrating their leather anniversary, and their lives had reached a stability that seemed impossible in those early difficult days. But life, as always, had more lessons to teach. Austin showed up at the store one day with big news. He had proposed to Megan Rose and she had accepted. But more than that, he had made an important decision. "I'm leaving Sterling Boutiques," he announced. "I'm going to start my own business, something that's mine." Avery was surprised and proud at the same time. "But you've always worked there. It's safe, it's stable." "Exactly," Austin interrupted. "Safe and stable, but it's not mine. I want to build something from scratch, like you did. I want to know what it's like to fight for what's yours." "Do Mom and Dad know?" "Not yet," Austin admitted. "I'm afraid of disappointing them." "They'll understand," Avery assured. "They've changed a lot. You'll see." And Avery was right. When Austin told his parents, expecting resistance, he found support. Margaret even offered advice on how to start a business. Richard offered help with the initial bookkeeping. It was a sign of how the whole family had grown and changed over those 3 years. Austin and Megan's wedding was simple but beautiful. Unlike Avery and Ethan's wedding, there were no mockeries or abandonments. The whole family was there, supporting, celebrating. It was a striking contrast that didn't go unnoticed by anyone. During the toast, Austin gave a speech that moved everyone. "3 years ago, my sister got married in a way I thought was ridiculous," he began. "I was one of those who abandoned her that day, and I carry the shame of that to this day." Avery felt tears starting to fall. "But Avery," Austin continued, looking at her, "you taught me something that changed my life. You taught me that courage isn't doing what everyone expects. It's doing what your heart tells you, even when you're scared, even when everyone is against you. Megan and I are here today because you showed us the way." The speech was followed by applause and tears from the whole family. It was a public acknowledgement of the impact Avery and Ethan had had, not only on their own lives, but on the lives of everyone around them. Months later, something happened that no one expected. Mrs. Dorothy, the great-grandmother, passed away at 92. She simply fell asleep one night and didn't wake up. It was a peaceful passing, without suffering. The funeral was both sad and celebratory. Mrs. Dorothy had lived a long life, and in the end she had seen her values triumph in the granddaughter who bore her name. Before she left, she had left a letter for Avery. Margaret handed it to her after the funeral. "My dear Avery," the letter began in Mrs. Dorothy's trembling handwriting, "if you're reading this, it's because I've already passed on. Don't be sad. I lived a long time, and I lived well in the end, thanks to you. When you got married riding that horse, I saw in you the courage I never had. You dared to love truly without fear of the consequences. And because of that, you gave me the most precious gift an old woman could receive, the certainty that true love still exists in this world. I fought your battle through you. I lived your triumphs as if they were my own, and I died happy knowing you will raise my great-granddaughter with the same values I tried to teach you. Always be yourself, Avery, no matter what the world says, no matter how many times they come down on you. Always be authentic, always brave, always loving. That's my last lesson for you. True success isn't measured in money or status. It's measured in how much love you leave in this world, and you, my dear granddaughter, will leave a lot. With all my eternal love, Grandma Dorothy." Avery cried reading that letter, but they were tears of gratitude more than sadness. Mrs. Dorothy had lived fully until the end and had passed on in peace. The loss of her grandmother made Avery reflect on legacy. What did she want to leave for the world, for her daughter, for all the people her story had touched? She talked to Ethan about it. "I think we should do something bigger," she said. "Something that helps other people who are going through what we went through." "Like what?" "I'm not exactly sure," Avery admitted. "But there are so many people out there facing family rejection for following their hearts. So many young couples struggling financially. Maybe we can create something that helps them. The idea started small. They created a free support group that met once a week at the store after closing, a space where people could share their stories, seek advice, find community. The first meeting had 5 people. The second had 12. The third had 25. The group continued to grow. The stories Avery and Ethan heard at these meetings were heartbreaking. Young people disowned for choosing partners their families disapproved of. Couples on the brink of separation due to financial pressures. People struggling with the decision between following their dreams or doing what was expected of them. Avery didn't have magic answers for anyone, but she had her story. And sometimes that was exactly what people needed to hear, that someone had been through something similar and survived, that it was possible to be happy even after losing everything, that love could truly overcome any obstacle. One of the regular participants in the group was a 20-year-old young man named Grant. He had been kicked out of his home when he told his parents he was gay. He was living in a shelter, working odd jobs, trying to finish college. Avery and Ethan connected especially with Grant. They saw in him a reflection of their own struggle 3 years earlier. Eventually, they offered him a job at the store. Nothing grand, but enough for him to rent a room and continue his studies. Grant became like an adopted son to them. He had Sunday dinners at their house. He helped take care of Dorothy. He became part of the extended family. Seeing Grant thrive despite all the odds reinforced for Avery the importance of the work she and Ethan were doing. They weren't just selling savory treats. They were building a community based on values of acceptance, love, and mutual support. When Dorothy turned 2, Avery discovered she was pregnant again, this time with a boy. They decided to name him Harold, in honor of Mr. Harold, who had performed their wedding ceremony and who had passed away a few months earlier. The pregnancy was easier this time. Avery had learned to better balance her responsibilities, and she had a solid support network. Margaret was always there, Mrs. Janet too. Even Victoria, who had grown closer after that conversation in the park, helped when she could. The birth of Harold was a moment of pure joy. Unlike the first delivery, there were no complications. It was quick, almost peaceful. Ethan held his son in his arms and cried with happiness. 2 kids, he murmured. How did we get here? 1 step at a time, Avery replied, echoing the words she had said so many times to others. 1 day at a time, 1 choice at a time. With 2 small children and 2 businesses to manage, life became even more hectic. But Avery and Ethan had learned important lessons over the years. They knew when to delegate. They knew when to ask for help. They knew when to say no. The stores continued to thrive, not because they were the biggest or the most profitable, but because they kept that personal touch that set them apart. Customers came not only for the quality of the savory treats, but for the experience, for the feeling of being valued, of being seen. One day, 5 years after the original wedding, Avery received an unexpected call. It was a television producer named Spencer. He had heard about her story and wanted to make a documentary. Your story deserves to be told on a larger scale, Spencer argued. It could inspire millions of people. Avery was tempted, but she was also cautious. She had seen how the media could distort stories, how it could turn something genuine into superficial entertainment. I need editorial control, she said. If we're going to do this, it has to be honest. It has to show the hard parts, not just the triumphs. Spencer agreed, and so began the filming process that would last 6 months. It was strange having cameras follow her daily life, but Avery forced herself to be authentic. She didn't pretend everything was perfect. She showed the arguments with Ethan. She showed the exhaustion. She showed the moments of doubt. The documentary aired on national television and made an immediate impact. Millions of people watched. Social media exploded with discussions about the themes the documentary touched on: love versus convention, authenticity versus appearances, happiness versus wealth. With that national exposure came even bigger opportunities: invitations to give talks in other cities, book proposals, franchise offers for the savory treats business. Avery and Ethan considered everything carefully. They accepted some things, turned down others. They wrote a book telling their story in detail, but refused the franchise, not wanting to lose control over the quality and values of the business. The book, Riding on Courage, a story of love and overcoming, became a bestseller. Avery was amazed by its reach. She received letters from readers all over the country, telling her how the story had inspired them to make changes in their own lives. But with fame also came scrutiny. Investigative journalists tried to find skeletons in the closet. Skeptical bloggers questioned the authenticity of the story. There was always someone trying to tear them down. Ethan handled it better than Avery. He had developed an admirable ability to ignore the noise and focus on what really mattered. "The people who truly know us know who we are," he would say, when Avery was upset by a particularly cruel criticism. "Everything else is just noise," Avery learned from him. She learned not to read every comment, not to give trolls a platform, to keep her focus on the people who really needed her message. When Dorothy turned 4 and Harold 2, Avery made an important decision. She was going to take a sabbatical year, a whole year focused only on family, no work, no talks, no professional commitments. "But what about the business?" Ethan asked. "The business will be in your hands and the team's," Avery replied. "You all can handle everything, I trust you, and I need this time with our children, before they grow up and this time passes." Ethan fully supported the decision, and so Avery stepped away from the stores, handing everything over to Ethan and the head manager, a competent woman named Carla who had been with them for 3 years. That year was transformative. Avery rediscovered simple pleasures she had forgotten: playing with the kids at the park, helping Dorothy with her homework, taking Harold to see the ducks at the pond, cooking at home for pleasure, not to sell. She also used that time to reconnect with old friends she had lost touch with, to visit Mrs. Peggy, who was 80 now and no longer working, to spend time with her mother, with Mrs. Janet, with all the people who had been important in her journey. And at the end of that year, when she returned to work, Avery was a renewed person. She had clarity about what really mattered, and she had renewed energy to continue the work she loved. The documentary had a lasting impact. Years after its release, it still inspired people. Avery received occasional messages from people saying they had watched it and made important decisions in their lives based on what they saw. One such message came from an 18-year-old young woman named Julia. She was about to enter medical school because that was what her parents wanted, but her dream was to be an artist. Watching the documentary gave her the courage to talk to her parents and stand up for her dream. "Did your parents support you?" Avery asked when Julia visited her in person years later. "Not at first," Julia admitted, "but they saw I was serious, and little by little they came around. Today they come to all my art exhibitions, and even if they don't fully understand, they support me." Stories like Julia's were the true reward of Avery's work. It wasn't the money I made from the book or the lectures. It wasn't the recognition or the fame. It was knowing that I had helped people live more authentic lives. 6 years had passed since the original wedding. Avery was 31 now. Ethan was 34. They had built a beautiful life, not perfect, but true. They decided to have a big celebration for their sugar anniversary. They rented the same country estate where they had gotten married. They invited everyone who was part of their journey. It would be a night of gratitude, reflection, and celebration. More than 500 people showed up. It was a vivid demonstration of how many lives Avery and Ethan had touched over those 6 years. There were customers from the store, participants from the support group, readers of the book, people who had seen the documentary and traveled specifically to meet the couple. During the party, several people shared testimonies of how Avery and Ethan had impacted their lives. There were hours of emotional stories, of tears and laughter, of genuine connection. When it was time for Avery and Ethan to speak, they climbed onto the small stage set up for the occasion. Avery was holding Dorothy in her arms, now a 6-year-old girl. Ethan was holding Harold, an energetic little boy of 4. "6 years ago, we got on a horse and got married," Avery began, "and it was the most humiliating and most liberating day of my life at the same time. There was comforting laughter from the audience. We were ridiculed, abandoned, rejected," Ethan continued, "but we were also loved by a few special people who saw past the appearances, who saw who we really were. And today, looking at all of you, I see that wedding wasn't a mistake, Avery said, her voice choked with emotion. It was the best decision of my life. Because that day defined who I am. It defined the values I live by, and it brought me here, with you, with my family, with this incredible community. We don't have a perfect life, Ethan added. We still have bills to pay. We still have hard days. We still have moments of doubt. But we have something that money can't buy. We have peace. We have authenticity. We have true love. And if I could give one piece of advice to all of you, Avery concluded, it would be this. Have the courage to be yourselves, even when it's hard, even when everyone is against you, because in the end, the only approval that really matters is your own. The only life you need to be proud of living is yours. The end of the story. This was a fictional story created to touch our hearts. Now tell us what you thought of this story of overcoming. Have you also faced judgment for your choices? How did you deal with it? Leave your honest opinion in the comments. Don't forget to leave a like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other emotional stories.